The most painful moment of my life wasn't losing my husband. It was the day I realized the son I adored had died too. He was replaced by a stranger who looked at my life savings and saw nothing more than a stepping stone. He told me my final wishes could wait. He didn't know that as a head nurse, I spent my life making tough decisions to save people. He never imagined I'd be willing to make one more to save myself. Before I begin, thank you for being here, for being part of this community. If you believe in the power of a woman finding her voice and reclaiming her dignity, you are in the right place. Please let me know in the comments where you're listening from. It means the world to me. Now, let me tell you what they did to me. My name is Esther May Johnson. I am 68 years old and a widow. For 42 years, I was a nurse at Charlotte Memorial Hospital. I retired as the head nurse of the entire surgical wing and a senior hospital administrator. My late husband, David, was a foreman for a construction company. He was a man who built things to last. Our worlds were different, but they were governed by the same principles. You assess the situation, you make a plan, you execute it with precision because people's lives are on the line. David built sturdy foundations for buildings. I managed the organized chaos that kept people alive. I made critical decisions under pressure and navigated the complex arteries of hospital bureaucracy. Our life was built on the same principles. We lived in a modest but sturdy brick house in the University Park neighborhood. It was a community built on the sweat and savings of Black families who understood the value of ownership. We saved diligently. We paid our bills on time. We invested with a prudence that bordered on suspicion. David passed on from this world 8 years ago. He left me with a home that was paid for, a pension that was secure, and a savings account we had always called our final expenses fund. It was a nest egg built over 4 decades, a testament to our shared life of discipline. It was meant to ensure that I could face the end of my days with dignity without ever being a burden to anyone. My greatest pride, and as I would soon learn, my greatest weakness, is my only son, Jamal. He has my husband's charming smile, but none of his patience for the slow, steady work of building a life. Jamal wants the finished skyscraper without the tedious business of digging a foundation. His wife, Tiffanys, is a woman who lives her life through the glowing screen of her phone. She is a lifestyle influencer, a title I have never fully understood. Her business seems to consist of taking beautiful pictures of expensive things she often cannot afford. She posts them online for the approval of strangers. 5 years ago, they came to me with a dream. They had found the perfect house in a new upscale development near Ballantyne. It was a sprawling 5-bedroom affair with a 2-story foyer and a kitchen bigger than my entire first floor. It was, in my opinion, a house for a family of 6, not a young couple with no children and precarious incomes. But it was their dream, and I, a mother whose instinct has always been to nurture and protect, wanted to help. They had been rejected for a traditional mortgage. Their debt-to-income ratio was, in the bank's view, alarming. So I made them a proposition. I would use my sterling credit and substantial savings to help them secure the loan. I co-signed the mortgage. I put my own name and financial health on the line. To protect myself, I had my lawyer draw up a separate legal agreement. It made me a tenant in common on the deed. It gave me a legal stake in the property. It also included a formal contract for the personal loan I gave them for the entire down payment. The agreement was clear. They were to make all mortgage payments to the bank on time and keep the property fully insured. It was a carefully managed risk, a way to give my son his dream while keeping my own financial future secure. My support was my love, made tangible and legal. For the first year, things were fine. But soon I began noticing their mail forwarded from the bank, warning of late payments. I would gently ask Jamal about it. Jamal, honey, I got a notice from the bank. Is everything all right? The excuses were always plausible, always wrapped in the language of a striving entrepreneur. A client was late paying an invoice. An investment for Tiffanys brand had to be made. I was always lenient. I would sometimes cover a payment myself to protect my own credit. It was a gesture I saw as supportive. I did not see that I was merely enabling a sense of entitlement that was metastasizing like a cancer. Their life, as curated on Tiffanys social media, was a glittering fantasy. There were weekend trips to Charleston, front row seats at Hornets games, lavish dinners at trendy restaurants, an endless stream of new clothes, new gadgets, new everything. Tiffany would post photos of their dream home, captioning them with hashtags like Black excellence and building an empire. She spoke of their house not as a home. She saw it as a backdrop. a stage for the perfect life they were performing for the world. They were so busy building an empire of images that they seemed to have forgotten the quiet foundational debt they owed to the woman who had made it all possible. They were living in a house of cards. And I, their silent, ever-patient benefactor, was beginning to feel the first tremor of the collapse that was to come. The crisis arrived, as crises often do, on a perfectly ordinary Tuesday afternoon. I was in my kitchen humming along to the gospel station on the radio. I was preparing to bake a lemon pound cake for the church bake sale. The scent of citrus and butter filled the air. It was a comforting aroma of routine and tradition. The doorbell rang, a sharp, insistent chime that was out of place in the quiet rhythm of my day. I wiped my hands on my apron and went to the door. I found Jamal and Tiffanys standing on my porch. Their faces were etched with a look of theatrical desperation. Jamal was pacing, running a hand through his hair. Tiffanys stood wringing her hands. Her eyes were already glistening with unshed tears. It was a performance, and I, an unwitting audience member, had just been handed a front row seat. "Mama," Jamal said, his voice tight with a manufactured urgency as they stepped inside. "We need to talk. Something's happened." I led them into the living room, the room where David and I had watched our son grow up, the room that held the quiet, steady memories of a life built on solid ground. They refused my offer of iced tea. They sat together on the edge of the sofa, like actors waiting for their cue. "It's my brand, Mama Esther," Tiffanys began, her voice trembling. "We have an opportunity, a real one, a once-in-a-lifetime one." She explained in a rush of breathless sentences that a major national home decor company had noticed her online profile. They wanted to collaborate on a capsule collection, a line of signature Tiffanys Johnson candles and throw pillows. "This is it," she said, her eyes wide. "This is the moment that takes us to the next level. This would mean national exposure, a real revenue stream, everything we've been working for." "That sounds wonderful, Tiffanys," I said. My voice was calm, though a familiar knot of apprehension was tightening in my stomach. "What's the problem?" "The problem," Jamal cut in, taking over the narrative, "is the buy-in. The company wants us to show we're serious. We have to front the initial manufacturing costs. It's a significant amount of money. We have to have it by Friday." "We went to the bank," Tiffanys added, a tear finally escaping and tracing a dramatic path down her cheek. "We tried to get a business loan. They turned us down. Something about our debt-to-income ratio. It's just numbers. They don't see the vision." I saw the vision all too clearly. I saw the mountain of debt they had accumulated, the reckless spending, the life lived for the approval of strangers on the internet. I remained silent. I waited for the inevitable conclusion of their carefully rehearsed speech. Jamal leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. His expression was a careful mixture of desperation and filial respect. "Mama," he said, his voice dropping to a low, intimate register. "We know you have your savings, the money Dad left you, the money you've always called your final expenses fund." The air in the room grew still. He had spoken the unspoken. He had breached the final, sacred wall of our family's finances. That fund was not just money, it was my peace of mind. It was the physical manifestation of David's promise that I would always be taken care of. It was the fund that would pay for my funeral, for a plot next to my husband, for any unforeseen medical expenses that might arise in the twilight of my life. It was the money that ensured I would never, ever be a burden to my son. "We need it, Mama," Jamal said, his voice now a desperate plea. "All of it. It's the only way. We will pay you back, I swear, as soon as the first checks from the collaboration come in. This is the investment that will secure our future, our family's future." I looked at my son, at the handsome man he had become. For a moment, I could not see the child I had raised. I saw a stranger, a man whose ambition had burned away his sense of decency, his sense of respect. I saw a man who was looking at his mother's future, at her final dignity, and seeing it only as capital to be leveraged for his own immediate gain. The lemon scent in the air suddenly seemed cloying and artificial. The foundation of my world, a foundation I had believed to be as solid as the concrete David used to pour, had just been fractured. And the son I loved was holding the hammer. I looked from my son's pleading face to his wife's tear-streaked one. I felt a profound, bone-deep weariness. It was the weariness of a mother who had given everything, only to be asked for the one thing she had set aside for herself. "Jamal," I began, my voice quiet but firm. It was a tone I had not used with him since he was a teenager who had broken curfew. "That money is not for investments. You know what that money is for. It's for my end of life care. It's for my funeral. It's so that when my time comes, everything is taken care of. You won't have to worry about a thing. I tried to infuse my words with a sense of finality, a gentle but unbreachable boundary. I was appealing to his sense of love, of duty, of the natural order of things. But I was speaking a language he no longer understood. I know, Mama, I know, he said. His voice was laced with an impatience that was more insulting than any outright anger. But that's all theoretical. That's for someday. This is for now. This is a real, tangible opportunity that will be gone by the end of the week. Don't you see, by investing in us, you're investing in your own future. We'll be so successful. We can pay for 100 funerals. Tiffany, seeing my resolve, began to sob openly, a theatrical gulping sound that grated on my nerves. I don't understand why you won't support us, Mama Esther, she cried, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue she seemed to have produced from nowhere. You've always said you believed in Jamal. Was that a lie? Don't you believe in our dreams? Don't you want to see us succeed? The emotional blackmail was as clumsy as it was cruel. They were framing my prudence as a betrayal. My desire for a dignified end was an obstacle to their ambition. I felt a cold anger begin to rise within me, an anger I had not felt in many years. I stood up, a silent dismissal, and walked over to the window. I looked out at the garden David and I had planted together. The answer is no, I said, my back to them. The discussion is over. I expected them to leave. I expected a period of petulant silence, followed by an eventual grudging apology. I had drawn a line. In my world, lines were respected. I did not realize that in theirs, lines were merely obstacles to be bulldozed. The silence stretched, thick and heavy. Then I heard Jamal's voice. It was no longer pleading, no longer intimate. It was flat, cold, and utterly devoid of the warmth and love I had known my entire life. Mama, he said, the word a sharp, pointed dart. With all due respect, your funeral can wait. We need that money now. The words hit me with a physical force. I gripped the windowsill to steady myself. My knuckles turned white. It was not just the greed. It was the callous dismissal of my life, of my eventual death. It was the casual, brutal way he had weighed my final piece against his immediate desire and found it wanting. My funeral could wait. My needs, my fears, my carefully laid plans for a dignified end, they were all secondary to his and Tiffanys' need for scented candles and throw pillows. In that moment, something inside me broke. The image I had held of my son, the loving, if sometimes thoughtless boy I had raised, shattered into a million pieces. In his place stood a stranger, a man so consumed by his own wants that his mother's life was nothing more than an inconvenient future expense. The grief was so sudden, so absolute, that it stole the air from my lungs. I turned around slowly. My face was a blank mask. I looked at him, at this stranger wearing my son's face. I felt nothing but a vast, empty coldness. The fight had gone out of me. It was replaced by a profound, hollow shock. All right, I said. My own voice sounded distant and unfamiliar. The change in the room was instantaneous. Tiffanys' sobs ceased as if a switch had been flipped. Jamal's face flooded with a triumphant relief so naked it was obscene. They had won. They had broken me. I walked past them as if in a trance. I retrieved my purse and my car keys. I did not speak. I did not look at them. I drove to the bank. The familiar streets of my neighborhood looked strange and alien. I felt like a ghost, a spectator in my own life. I walked up to the teller, a nice young woman who always asked about my garden. I could not meet her eyes. I need to withdraw the full balance of my savings account, I said, my voice a dead monotone, in a cashier's check. She looked at me with concern, but I offered no explanation. I signed the withdrawal slip. My signature, once a symbol of my meticulous control, was now the final act of my capitulation. I took the check, the crisp, official paper representing 40 years of thrift and love. I drove back home. Jamal and Tiffany were waiting by the door. Their faces were alight with a greedy, impatient excitement. I handed the check to my son. I did not look at him. I could not. He took it from my hand. His fingers brushed against mine, and I flinched from his touch. "Thank you, Mama," he said, his voice bright with victory. "You won't regret this. We're going to make you so proud." I watched them leave, watched them get into their car and drive away with my future in their pocket. I closed the door and leaned against it. The cool wood was a small comfort against my back. The shock was beginning to recede. In its place, something new and terrible was beginning to rise from the ashes of my grief. It was a cold, quiet, and utterly unforgiving fury. The loving mother was gone. The head nurse, the woman who knew how to make hard decisions under pressure, was all that was left. After they left, a profound silence descended upon the house, a silence that was heavier and more absolute than any I had ever known. It was the silence of a great loss, the silence that follows a death. And in a way, something had died. The son I had known, the boy I had raised, was gone. The man who had taken his place was a stranger to me. For a long while, I did not move. I simply stood by the door, adrift in a sea of shock and grief. The pound cake I had been preparing sat half mixed on the kitchen counter, a forgotten relic from a life that no longer existed. Then, slowly, almost imperceptibly, the grief began to change. It was a chemical reaction, a slow curdling of sorrow into something else. The heartbreak did not disappear, but it cooled, it hardened, it sharpened into a cold, precise, and methodical rage. It was an emotion I recognized, a feeling I had known well from my years in hospital administration. It was the detached calm that comes before a difficult but necessary triage. The moment you stop seeing the emotional chaos and start seeing only the critical facts of the case. The moment you have to decide which limb to save and which to sacrifice for the good of the patient. In this case, I was the patient, and my son was the gangrenous limb. The loving, nurturing mother was gone. In her place was Esther May Johnson, the administrator who had managed budgets, staff, and crises for decades, the head nurse who knew that sentimentality could be fatal. And I realized with a chilling clarity that my son and his wife had just presented a critical symptom of a much larger disease. Their financial recklessness was now a direct threat to my own survival. My movements were no longer aimless. They were deliberate, imbued with a new and terrible purpose. I walked from the living room into my small home office, the room where I still kept all my important papers, filed and organized with a lifetime of practiced discipline. I knelt down and pulled out the old fireproof lockbox from the bottom of the filing cabinet, the one where I kept the things that truly mattered. The one where I kept the things that truly mattered. My marriage license, David's military discharge papers, the deed to my house, and the legal agreement my lawyer had drawn up 5 years ago. The metal was cool and solid in my hands. I carried the box to the dining room table and opened it. My hands were perfectly steady as I lifted out the thick sheaf of papers. I spread the document out on the polished wood. The pages were crisp and official. I had insisted on it. A move my lawyer called wise and Jamal had called unnecessary. Now I saw it for what it was. A scalpel. I put on my reading glasses and began to read. The agreement clearly stated my position as a tenant in common, a co-owner of the property. It detailed the terms of the down payment loan, but the clause I was looking for, the one my lawyer had insisted upon for my protection, was in Section 3, Covenants of the Mortgagors. Section 3C read, the mortgagors, Jamal and Tiffanys Johnson, covenant to maintain the property in good standing with the primary mortgage lender and to keep the property fully insured against all perils, with Esther May Johnson listed as a co-insured party. A lapse in insurance coverage or a mortgage delinquency exceeding 60 days shall constitute a material breach of this agreement, putting the co-signer's financial standing at immediate and significant risk. The remedy was just as clear. In the event of a material breach, I had the right to initiate a partition action, a legal proceeding to force the sale of the jointly owned property in order to dissolve the co-ownership and protect my financial interests, add the bank notices of their late payments. But I needed to know the current status. As a co-signitor on the loan, I had every right to that information. I picked up the phone and called the bank's mortgage department. After navigating the automated system and verifying my identity with a series of security questions, I was connected to a loan officer. Yes, Mrs. Johnson, he said after a few moments of typing. I see the account here. I'm showing the last 2 payments have not been received. The account is currently 62 days delinquent and is about to be reported to the credit bureaus. The final piece clicked into place. They had come to me for my savings. While they were actively defaulting on the loan they knew I had co-signed. A default that would shatter the credit I had spent a lifetime building. The check I gave them wasn't just a gift they didn't deserve. It was money they should have been using to honor their most basic obligation. I sat there for a long time. The legal agreement was spread out before me like a patient's chart. The diagnosis was clear. The prognosis was terminal. The grief for my son was still there, a cold, hard stone in my chest, but it was now surrounded by the iron resolve of a woman who had been wronged, a woman who knew the system, and a woman who was about to perform a surgical extraction. I picked up the phone. I did not call Jamal. I did not call Tiffany. I called my lawyer. Mr. Davenport, I said, my voice as calm and steady as it had been during a code blue. This is Esther May Johnson. I have a co-ownership agreement that has been materially breached. I would like to file a partition action to force the sale of the property. There was a pause on the other end of the line. Esther May, he said, his voice softening slightly. I'm sorry to hear it has come to this, but I'm not surprised. Bring the paperwork to my office tomorrow morning. We'll get the process started. I hung up the phone. The treatment plan was in place. The next morning, I met with Marcus Davenport in his downtown office. The room was paneled in dark wood and lined with shelves of thick, leather-bound law books. It was a space that projected an aura of unshakable authority. I laid out the documents on his large mahogany desk, the original co-ownership agreement, the loan contract for the down payment, and the official notices from the bank showing the mortgage delinquency. Mr. Davenport, a man with sharp eyes and a mind to match, reviewed the papers in silence. He read every clause. His pen made small, precise notes in the margins. When he was finished, he leaned back in his leather chair and looked at me. Not with pity, but with a kind of quiet, professional admiration. Esther May, he said, his voice a low rumble, this is airtight. Their delinquency with the bank is a clear material breach. It puts your name, your credit, and your financial health at significant risk. A partition action is not only justified, it's the medically necessary course of action, if you'll pardon the metaphor. He paused, his gaze steady. Are you certain this is the path you want to take? This is your son. My son, I replied, my voice devoid of any tremor, made his choice when he told me my funeral could wait. This is no longer a family matter, Mr. Davenport. This is a risk management issue. Please proceed. He nodded, a grim, satisfied look on his face. Very well, he said. Consider it done. The legal machinery, once set in motion, moved with a swift and impersonal efficiency. There were no more gentle text messages from me. The next communication Jamal and Tiffany received was a formal, legally binding notice of the partition action. It was delivered by a certified process server to their front door. It informed them that as a co-owner, I was petitioning the court to force the sale of the property to protect my interests. My phone began to ring less than an hour after the papers were served. It was Jamal. I let it go to voicemail. Then came a text message. A string of frantic question marks, then another and another. I ignored them all. The power had shifted. I was no longer the worried mother covering their debts. I was the plaintiff, and I was in control. The explosion came that evening. They appeared at my front door, not with the rehearsed desperation of their previous visit, but with faces contorted in masks of pure, unadulterated rage. I did not open the screen door. I spoke to them through the mesh, a barrier that felt both physical and symbolic. What is the meaning of this, Mama? Jamal shouted, waving the legal notice in his hand. Forcing a sale? Are you insane? You're going to make us homeless? I am not making you anything, I said. My voice was calm and even, a stark contrast to his hysteria. I am exercising my legal right as a co-owner to protect myself from the financial ruin you have exposed me to. You breached our agreement. This is because we asked for the money, isn't it? Tiffany shrieked. Her carefully constructed influencer facade crumbled to reveal the raw greed beneath. This is revenge. You are a cruel, vindictive old woman. How could you do this to your own family? Family? I repeated the word, letting it hang in the air between us. A family does not look at their mother's end-of-life savings and see a business opportunity. A son does not tell his mother her funeral can wait. And a family certainly does not default on a mortgage that has their own mother's name on it. I saw a flicker of shame in Jamal's eyes, but it was quickly extinguished by his anger. "It was a figure of speech," he yelled. "You can't destroy our lives over a figure of speech. We'll pay the bank. We'll get the mortgage up to date." "It is too late for that," I said. My voice was as final as a doctor delivering a terminal diagnosis. "You have demonstrated a pattern of financial irresponsibility that constitutes a material breach. The legal action has been filed. The court will order the sale. My name and my credit will be made whole." The amount of the delinquent payments was, of course, a figure they could not possibly produce, let alone the legal fees they would now incur trying to fight me. It was a checkmate. They stood there, stunned into silence by the cold, inescapable logic of the law. The begging began then, a desperate, pathetic torrent of promises and apologies that rang hollow. They pleaded. They threatened to tell the whole family what a monster I was. They accused me of trying to ruin their lives, their brand, their future. I listened to it all. My expression was unchanging. When they had finally exhausted their arsenal of manipulation, I delivered the final devastating blow. "You came to my house and told me you needed cash now," I said. My voice was quiet, but carried the weight of a final judgment. "I have found myself in a similar position. I need to mitigate my risk. This is not personal. This is just sound administration." I closed the main door. I shut out their cries and their threats. The reckoning was in motion. The necessary procedure was underway, and for the first time in a long time, I felt a profound, quiet sense of order being restored to my world. The court process was, as my lawyer had predicted, swift and decisive. Faced with the undeniable evidence of the co-ownership agreement and the bank's delinquency records, the judge quickly granted the petition for a partition by sale. Jamal and Tiffany were given a court-ordered date by which they had to vacate the property. Their dream home, the backdrop for their fraudulent life, was to be sold. The collapse of their online empire was as swift as it was spectacular. Without the perfect house to serve as their stage, Tiffanys' lifestyle brand imploded. Their followers, a fickle and unforgiving audience, quickly turned on them when whispers of the forced sale and their financial ruin began to circulate. The carefully curated image of Black excellence was shattered. It was replaced by the ugly reality of forced sale and fraud. They were exposed, humiliated, and abandoned by the same virtual crowd whose approval they had so desperately craved. The day after they moved out, I went to the house. I drove over. My car felt strangely out of place in the upscale cookie-cutter neighborhood. I used the key my lawyer had provided to open the front door. The house was empty, but it was not clean. They had left in a hurry. They left behind a trail of debris and a lingering atmosphere of resentment. Empty takeout containers littered the granite countertops of the enormous kitchen. Dust bunnies gathered in the corners of the vast, empty rooms. The house felt like a hollow shell, a monument to their failed ambitions. I did not feel a sense of triumph as I walked through the echoing rooms. I felt a quiet, somber sense of closure. I had no desire to live there. The house was tainted by their greed and my own heartbreak. It was not a home, it was an asset, and I was going to liquidate it. I did not try to sell it myself. I hired the best real estate agent in Charlotte, a sharp, no-nonsense woman who understood the market. On her advice, I hired a company to professionally deep clean the entire house, to erase the last vestiges of their presence. I had the walls repainted in a neutral, welcoming shade of beige. I paid for a professional staging company to furnish the house, to make it look warm, inviting, and full of the happy potential that it had never possessed with them in it. It was an investment, and like all good investments, it paid off. The house sold in less than a month. It sold for a price significantly higher than what they had paid for it. The housing market was strong. The staged, pristine home was an attractive product. From the proceeds, the original bank mortgage was paid off in full. My name was cleared from that obligation forever. The loan I had given them for the down payment was returned to me with interest. After the agent's commission and all my expenses were paid, I was left with a substantial profit. I sat down at my dining room table with my bank statements, the same table where I had made the decision to fight back. With a steady hand, I began to settle the final accounts. My first act was to take the exact amount of money they had taken from me and place it into a newly created, untouchable, irrevocable trust. This was my final expenses fund. It is now secure from any future claims, protected by a wall of legal fortifications. My peace of mind was restored. My second act was to take the remaining profit from the sale of the house and establish a new scholarship at the Central Piedmont Community College School of Nursing. I called it the David and Esther May Johnson Nursing Scholarship. It would provide full tuition for 2 students every year who had the heart and the grit to enter the profession that had given me so much. It would build real legacies, not the hollow, imaginary ones my son had chased. I never spoke to Jamal again. I heard through the church grapevine that he and Tiffany had moved into a small rental apartment in a town I had never heard of. Their empire was gone. Their dream was over. I, on the other hand, was at peace. My life was my own again, quiet, orderly, and secure. My future was protected. My husband's legacy was honored in a way that would genuinely help our community. I had been faced with a terrible choice, a heartbreaking betrayal, but I had not crumbled. I had done what I had always done, what my life as a nurse and an administrator had taught me to do. I had assessed the damage. I stopped the bleeding. I made the hard but necessary decision to ensure the patient, myself, would survive.